Stingray Tide says, I have a question. Can lower unit pinion gear be swapped to have the prop operate counterclockwise? Well, thank you for subscribing and for the comment. It's a great topic. Now, what you're asking as far as the pinion gear is concerned, that's going to stay the same. You don't really swap that in order to shift the shifting and the operation of the lower unit from a clockwise to a counterclockwise. The pinion gear is going to stay the same. Forward gear, all the gears and all that stuff is going to stay the same in the lower unit. What changes it from being a left-handed or a right-handed or counterclockwise and clockwise is going to be the shift mechanism inside the lower unit. So inside the lower unit, you've got a shift mechanism that moves that clutch dog either forward or back. And then depending on which gear it goes in, that's what's going to put it into a left-handed or a right-handed lower unit. Now, physically, can you switch it? Yes, you could take a right-handed lower unit and you can just take that shift mechanism and flip it 180 degrees, and now you're going to have a left-handed gear case. Now, should you do that? Not really. It's going to depend on the model. I've seen left-handeds become right-handeds and them last quite a long time, but that's going to depend on the model because the forward bearing and the forward gear and the reverse gear and the reverse bearing are usually completely different in the vast majority of lower units. And that is due to the strength of everything, because in reverse, you're not going 5,500, 6,000 RPM in reverse. So you don't have the same amount of torque and pressure and force being applied to that bearing and to that gear as you do in forward. So in reverse, most of the time, the gears and the bearings aren't the same because they don't need to be as strong. A lot of gear cases nowadays, the gears are built the same, and like Suzuki, the gear case is the same, and you just have a little like plug thing that you can flip up in the engine, and that's going to change the direction of it being a left-handed and a right-handed. So again, it's going to depend on the model because of that forward and reverse gear. Now, the reason that you have a left-handed and a right-handed engine to begin with isn't, I mean, for the most part, there's a couple different reasons, but for the most part, it's tracking and lift. So on a boat, you know, when that propeller is spinning right-handed or standard or counterclockwise, you know, clockwise, you're turning clockwise. So it's always spinning like this. On a single engine or like an inboard or anything like a sailboat, everybody calls it prop walk. So when that propeller is spinning like this, it's always going to be moving or pulling the boat or pushing the boat in a specific direction. Same thing with an outboard. If you have a single engine, if you're just sitting there in gear, generally that rotation like this is going to make the boat turn like that. So when you put two engines on the boat, and if they were both right-handed, that boat is going to tend to steer to the right. And then if you put a left-handed or a counterclockwise propeller on the other side, so now you've got two of them going like this, that's going to help you move straight and track straight in the water. It is also going to give you lift. So, you know, if you've got one propeller spinning like this, one spinning like this, that right there is going to give you, you know, some lift on the back, and it's going to help get the boat up out of the water and onto plane quicker and keep more of the boat on plane to give you less drag, which increases efficiency. You can swap them, like you can take a left-handed and put it on the right and a right-handed on the left, and now they're spinning in, so your propeller is opposed to normally spinning out with a left and a right. If they're spinning out, it gives you a certain amount of lift. But if you swap them and they're spinning in, if you think about it, like if you take two gears and you spin them in together, they're going to want to climb on top of each other, so you get more lift or stern lift if you have them swapped. So if you've got the left on the right and the right on the left, you get more stern lift, which is going to move the bow down. So, you know, that application is going to be specific to certain types of boats. If you have a boat that already has, you know, it tends to have the bow down, you don't want more stern lift, because if you have more stern lift, that's going to force that bow down into the water more, depending on the application and the boat and how it rides and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of physics that you can play around with there being a left and a right. But as far as like taking a left-hand lower unit and making it a right hand on some lower units, some models. Yes, you can do that. Like Suzuki, it's not going to matter on certain models, but other models, you don't really want to do that because, again, you know, the forward and the reverse gear and the bearing sets are different, and it's, you know, specifically made for that, because when it's in gear, you know, that the propeller is pushing you forward. So it's pushing the prop shaft and everything into that gear, into that forward gear. So all that force is being put into that gear. Now, if you swap it and you're running your reverse gear as your forward gear, you can have some problems there because the physics is being put on that lower unit. It's not designed for that. And all you did was shift it. So yeah, it'll work, but how long will it work? I mean, I don't know, you know, lower units are tougher than you might think, but at the same time, eventually you're going to tear the lower unit up quicker and shorten the life of it if you do something like that. Again, depending on the model, but that's what it is. Not the pinion gear. The pinion gears are going to stay the same. It's going to be in the shift mechanism that is going to be what's going to change it out. Mike Wiener wants to know, how do you get that bearing carrier out? I don't see any screws, etc., to loosen it on a 2007 Yamaha 150 horsepower. On a 150 Yamaha, it's going to be different. Every carrier is going to come out different based on the model. Talking same thing of doing the shift mechanism. Lower units are going to vary in the way they're put together based on the horsepower. So a smaller lower unit, like a 25 horse, is going to have a different bearing carrier assembly than a 150 or a 300 or a 450. You know, it's going to change based on the build of the lower unit, based on the horsepower. On your 150, that's going to be completely different on how that assembly is going to come out. So on that one, you're going to have a spanner nut that holds it on. You're going to take that spanner nut out and then pull the bearing carrier out. And then depending on the 150, I don't think the shift shaft has to come out. Like on some other models, the shift shaft has to come out with the bearing carrier. So what you really need to do is get a service manual to figure out, you know, what kind of gear case you have. But yeah, bearing carriers are going to come out different based on the model that you have. On a 150, you're not going to have screws like on the one that you saw being like a 25 horse, where there's two bolts that hold that bearing carrier, and you take the two bolts out, you can pull the carrier out. 150, you're going to have a spanner nut. You're going to have to take the spanner nut out, and then you'll be able to pull the bearing carrier. So it depends a lot on the build. You can go to partsview.com or boats.net in order to look up your model based on the year and the model number, and you can go to the lower unit and see the assembly, you know, broken down in a diagram, so you'll be able to kind of get a better idea of what you're messing with. That'd be, you know, one option as well. 110 Welding wants to know, how do you keep maintenance on your outboard if you keep it in a slip? How do you flush and clean? Flushing it, most outboards, yeah, you have to trim them up out of the water. You can flush them like that. You know, when they're trimmed out of the water, you're still going to have, like, the engine's going to be angled like this. So when you flush it, it's not going to be a problem. But if you have it to where your boat is like, if the outboard's like this and you flush it, that's not going to be good, because you can actually get water. If it's completely vertical or like this, you don't want to flush it like that, because then through the exhaust, it can get into the exhaust and get water into the engine. But if your boat's just living in the water, the engine's still going to trim up like this. It's going to have some negative trim to it, and you can flush it with it trimmed. That won't be a problem. And as far as the maintenance goes, you have to pull the boat out of the water to do the lower unit. Unless you've got a 425 or a 600 Mercury, everything else, for the lower unit, you have to pull it out of the water, because in order to change the impeller, in order to change the gear lube, you can't do that in a slip. You'll have to pull the boat out of the water to maintain your lower unit. Other than that, pretty much everything on the engine can be serviced while it's in the water. You can change the spark plugs, the fuel filters, your oil filter. You can suck the oil out of the engine and then add oil to the engine. So pretty much everything. Anodes, you'll have to pull the boat out of the water to change your anodes, but service-wise, you can do pretty much everything else in the water. Unless you have like a Yamaha 3.3 liter, you probably don't want to change the oil filter of that engine in the water, because it's a very high likely chance that you're going to spill some oil, and you don't want that oil going all in the water. So depending on what engine you have, you can do most of the maintenance in the water, but eventually you are going to have to pull the boat out of the water to service lower unit and anodes. Dustin Keating says, I have a 2007 model Yamaha 115 two-stroke. I have oil injection, but I also put oil in my gas. Also, my mechanic said it wouldn't hurt nothing. Plus, I keep ring-free in my gas. Also, I just want to know my motor is good and lubricated. Yeah, you shouldn't have any problem with that. I mean, adding some extra oil. I mean, you're over-oiling the engine, obviously, because the precision blend oiling system, or whatever they call it, that is oiling the engine the way it should be oiled. So you really don't need to add oil to your gas. But I mean, as a fail-safe, yeah, you're not going to hurt anything. You're just burning more oil. You're going to smoke more. You're going to foul plugs quicker. And then also think about, ring-free is a cleaner. So you're putting a cleaner in with the oil. So you're doing a lot there. Any of it going to hurt the engine? No, you're going to be all right doing all that. So that's cool. NTJ says, is Yamaha ring-free plus good for burning carbon? Yes, it is to a point. Depends on it. Like if you run an engine that's got 1,500 hours and has never had ring-free put in it or any kind of carbon cleaner in there, then the carbon buildup that is most likely built up inside that engine already, ring-free is not really going to clean that off. Like ring-free is good for preventing carbon and making sure that everything's clean. It's going to keep your injectors clean. It's going to keep your fuel system clean, and it will keep carbon from building inside your combustion chamber, on the rings, on top of the piston, on the valves. It's going to clean all that. But if you already have carbon built up on there, it's not going to break that carbon up and clean it out. It's not that effective of a cleaner when you're talking about old already built carbon. Like if you've already got 1,500 hours worth of carbon on the pistons, ring-free is not going to clean that off. It is good preventative maintenance. It's a phenomenal product. I mean, if you run ring-free from the get, or say you've even got 400 hours on your engine and you start running ring-free for the next 600 hours, like the inside of that engine is going to be spotless. It's a great product. I mean, Quick Clean's good too. Mercury's Quick Clean, I like both of those. GM says, guys, this is beyond excellent, and I have a quick question for you. Well, thank you, GM. And he says, I want to mount this on the back of my boat, and I'm determined to do so because I don't want it in the front. If you were installing it on the back, what would you be concerned about? So we're talking about putting a trolling motor on the back of a boat. What would I be concerned about putting a trolling motor on the back of the boat? One is functionality. Like that number one is going to be functionality. Because the way a trolling motor works is, it's using the physics of the boat. Boats are meant to go through the water, not back. So, think about a boat. In the front, it's all pointy and it's meant to, cut through the water and go straight, whereas the back is just a flat section. And, if you got a flat section hitting water, it's just not very good. So a trolling motor, you put it in the front of the boat and usually it pulls the boat through the water. Or if you're sitting in current, like if you've got, iPilot or something like that, where it's going to lock the boat in position, and say you're in a river, if you're in an inlet, if you're in current somewhere, the current is coming onto the boat and the bow of the boat is like this. So that trolling motor is meant to just, keep the bow into that current so it'll hold it in position. If you take that trolling motor and you put it on the back, the trolling motor is not going to have enough strength and it's not going to be able to do what you are going to want to do. Like because now you're trying to use the trolling motor to push the boat through the water. So realistically, you would need two of them. That's why generally you would have a kicker motor being like a 9.9 or a 15 horse or something like that you would do. That's generally what people would do. You would just put a kicker motor, not a trolling motor, because the trolling motor is not going to have the same amount of power as the kicker motor. Functionality wise, if you put the trolling motor on the back, like you can't put it in the middle because your outboard's in the middle or your engine's in the middle, depending on the boat. I don't know what boat you have, but if you got an outboard boat, putting a trolling motor on the back, if you put it on the back corner, you're trying to use that trolling motor to push the boat through the water. if you try and pull it, now the boat's going to be flipped around the wrong way, and you're pulling with the back of the boat. The trolling motor's probably not going to be strong enough to, pull the boat around the way you would think it would. And then if you're in current like that, trolling motor on one corner, the boat is just going to always push like that. If it's on this starboard corner and you try and push, it's always going to lose, you're going to lose the power. Like if the current's coming like this and you push the boat like through the water from the corner with a trolling motor, it's going to move that bow like this. The current's going to hit that bow and you're going to, it's just always going to lose it. So you'd have to have two trolling motors on the sides. What I would probably look at if I were you and you're talking about doing something like this, the problem is that, so you've got options. There are trolling motors that you can put onto the trim tabs. So if you got trim tabs on the back of the boat, there are trolling motors that will mount to the trim tabs, and they will, there's two of them, so it'll be able to move the boat forward. They also make trolling motors that you can put onto the anti-ventilation plate. That's another option. So, and then you use the engine to steer, but you're going to lose all of the features of a modern trolling motor, being like a brushless trolling motor with the the tracking and the hook point, so where you can like iPilot and stick into a position using the remote control, so you can be anywhere in the boat and move the trolling motor around and pull the boat wherever you want it. The memory of the tracking, so if you like run a bank and you memorize that track and then have the trolling motor pull the boat back through there, you're going to lose all those features because of the functionality, the physical functionality. It's not going to work with the boat. Even if you have two of them on the back, I don't know if those functions are really going to work the same way, because it's just the design, just the physical design and functionalities. I don't know if that's going to work the way you would think it would. I mean, you could try it. I mean, no one's going to stop you from trying it. I mean, go for it. It's obviously your money, and you could do whatever you want to do, but I don't think that it all depends on what exactly you're trying to do and how you use the boat. Like if you aren't going to be running a bank line and need that track point, you're not sitting in an inlet trying to fish on something where you need the boat to stay there, and you're just trying to, push the boat up a river or something like that, then possibly it might work, but you're going to probably need two of them. And at that point, it'd probably be the same amount of money to just go ahead and add a kicker motor to the back of the boat, or, it kind of needs to go in the front of the boat. So I hope that helps a little bit as far as what my concerns would be. So RB77 says, love the videos. Thank you. I've been trying to figure out how to move to the Keys. Was just wondering why you moved out of the Keys. So for us, we still go to the Keys a lot, and the Keys is super expensive. Can you move there? 100%. People move there all the time. Housing's kind of a problem, trying to find affordable housing, and then also work is a problem, just because the affordability down there is super, super high. We still go down there and do work down there. We moved basically for a financial and business standpoint, because we're trying to get a building in order to be able to make more content out of a building and be able to do more restoration projects. So for us, it was a business decision, not necessarily a, not wanting to live somewhere. It was strictly for business and to be able to create more content. Ryan Turgio, I don't know how to say your last name. Doesn't Mercury make a kit that does away with the secondary fuel filter? The newer 150s don't have it. So talking about the fuel filters on like older 2012 150s, like 2012 to like 14, maybe even 15, there was a secondary high pressure fuel filter on the back of the engine right after the FSM. And yeah, they got rid of that. You could just they make an elbow that you can put in there. So it's not really a kit. It's just you take the fuel filter out and you put that elbow in there and it just gets rid of it. So that's all that is, not anything special. Slim says, excellent. What about a cracked housing? Talking about the 7 ways. Okay, so we're talking about how a lower unit could take on water, and there's generally 7 ways that a lower unit can take on water, being the shift shaft, the drive shaft O-ring, the prop shaft O-ring, the 2 drain seals, and then the bearing carrier O-ring and the drive shaft bearing carrier. but I guess you could call it 8 because if you crack the gear case, then yeah, you're going to have a water leak there. But I mean, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about something that could be repaired. Like if a lower unit is leaking water and you could repair the lower unit, that's what I was talking about. But yeah, if you crack the gear case, then it's going to take on water, but you ain't going to repair that. So 100%. Too funny. Adrian says, is there a way to heat that part up there where the grease doesn't come out? I'm having the same issue. I have grease coming out the top, but nothing coming out the bottom. So talking about the swivel pin on a bracket on an outboard, so like where the bracket is and how the engine turns. So there's a like swivel bracket there, and inside that swivel bracket, the grease, if no one greases it for 10 years, the grease can get hot and get old and dry up, and it will block it to where you can't add grease, and also the steering will get stiff. So yes, you can heat them up, and that's generally how you repair that. If you have a bracket that is, it's got that old grease in there, it's gotten tight, you can't turn the engine. The main way is going to be able to heat it up. You got to take the pans off. So that way your lower cowl, that stuff's plastic. You take that off and you'll turn the engine over to one side, and usually you need oxyacetylene because you need that heat, and you will heat it up. By and large, what we do is drill a hole. It depends on the model because usually the grease fitting is down towards the bottom, but some of them, the grease fitting can be up at the top. So depending on where that grease fitting is, we will usually drill a hole on the other opposite end of where that grease fitting in is, and you will just tap that aluminum. It's really easy because it's soft metal. You can tap that and then insert a secondary grease fitting. So you will just drill that hole in there, heat it up, and then put a grease gun on the top grease fitting, and then you'll be able to put new grease in, and with that old grease being hot, you will push it out. You need to put rags over it because it is going to be dangerous because that grease can be so hot, it's almost going to liquefy it. And whenever you pressurize with the new grease, it is going to squirt that old stuff out. It can, build up pressure to where it pops and it throws hot grease everywhere. So you have to be careful when doing it, but you're just going to heat it up, go up and down that tube, heating it up, and eventually you'll get it to liquefy and be able to push it out. But generally, we drill holes in them, drill a new hole, tap it, put a secondary grease fitting, Zerk fitting, not a big deal. It's super common. Gufia says, my 2002 Mercury 225 EFI motor is misfiring, and at wide open throttle, it only gets up to 5 knots. This was random since earlier that day we were at 40 knots at wide open throttle. Any input, please? So 2002 Mercury 225 EFI misfiring. I mean, it could be anything. It could be a fuel filter. You've got something to clog that up. I would probably start looking at a fuel problem first, because if it was just a spark plug and you were misfiring with a one spark plug or one ignition coil, it shouldn't drop you from 40 to 5. My guess is you've got like a fuel restriction somewhere on the engine, or one of your fuel filters, whatever, maybe the pickup, to where you're not getting enough fuel, so that way you can't even get on plane, because going from 40 knots to 5 knots, you've lost all power. I'm guessing you got a fuel issue. I would start from take off the water separator, take a look at it, pour it out, see what you got, check your fuel filters on the engine, see what you got, and then just start troubleshooting the fuel system to figure out, what's going on, because most likely you've got a fuel delivery problem. Rat says, on a 2019 Yamaha 300 horsepower 4-stroke V6, 2,250 hours, recently started to lose power after 4,000 RPM if run 5 minutes or so. Feels like it's coughing. Never had this problem before. Every 200 hours, I do basic maintenance: oil, spark plugs, filters, thermostat, water pump. Never replace or clean injectors. What could be causing this issue? Thank you. So let me just do a little bit of math here. You got 2,250 divided by, on a 2019, divided by 5. You're putting about 500 hours, 450 hours on the engine a year. So you're using it. That's real good. If it's surging, recently started to lose power after 4,000 RPM, if run 5 minutes or so, I'm going to say it's a fuel delivery issue, because if you can So let's say you run it. I'm going to say it's a fuel delivery issue. Most likely there's a leak somewhere, maybe in the pickup, maybe there's a hole in one of the fuel lines or something like that, or a fuel fitting has gotten messed up. At 2,250 hours, that's enough hours to where, you might have something like that could happen. And the reason that I'm going to go fuel is because, well, I mean, if you're changing the spark plugs and all that, then your spark plugs are good. You could have a bad spark plug, but I would generally say fuel, because if you can run, let's say you run 5,500 wide open throttle, you're saying anything over 4,000. So if you run 5,500 wide open throttle, if that's your wide open throttle, and you can run that for 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden you start to lose power, I'm going to say it's a fuel volume problem, meaning that the VST is going to be full of fuel and you run it for, say, 5,500 RPM for 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden it starts to lose power and bog down and coughing and you're losing power, then most likely that VST is getting empty. So you're being able to get fuel to fill up the VST, and at say 3,500 RPM, the amount of fuel filling the VST is going to be enough to run the engine for that amount of RPM, 3,500, 4,000, whatever it may be, and no problems. But as soon as you go wide open throttle, you need more fuel to get that RPM. And if you're losing that RPM after 5 minutes, that means you've consumed all of the fuel out of the VST and you're not able to feed enough fuel or the volume amount of fuel to keep the VST full. Based on what you're saying, that's what I would start looking at first. Based on the way you're saying it, you're saying recently start to lose power after 4,000 RPM if I run it for 5 minutes or so. So yeah, I'm thinking either your pickup in the fuel tank might be messed up, or might be like, maybe where the hose goes on to there, or maybe at your fuel water separator bracket. Maybe there's something there. Maybe where the primer bulb is, maybe one of the connections there could be wrong. The fuel hose, where it goes up, it might have rubbed an issue or rubbed a little hole into the fuel hose where it's not enough to really leak out a bunch of fuel, but it's enough for it to suck air. So you're getting air into your fuel system, which at 3,500 RPM, it's not affecting it because the vapor separator tank is getting rid of the air, but it is also, it's getting rid of the air, and it's able to keep enough fuel in the VST to continue to run the engine. Whereas if you run 5,500 RPM, wide open throttle, whatever, above 4,000 RPM, and you can run that for 5 minutes before the problem happens, then yeah, I'm going to say that you've got an air leak and you're getting air into the fuel, and you're running out of fuel when you try and go over 4,000 RPM. That's what I would look at first before going into some kind of an electrical problem or something like that, because generally you will have a code or a bad spark plug or something like that. I mean, that's based on what you're saying. I would go the fuel first, take a piece of clear hose and put it on the engine right there, 2019 Yamaha 300. So you got a 4.2 liter on the front of that engine where your fuel filter is. I would just take that hose off and put a piece of clear hose there with a splice, and then just go out and run the engine and see what's going on. Like, just have someone watch it, run the engine, run it at 2,000 RPM, run it at 3,000 RPM, run it at 4,500 RPM, and look and see what the fuel delivery getting to the engine is. That would be where I would start. Chaotix, thanks for the video. Thank you, Chaotix. I recently purchased a 91 Chris Craft with a 3.0 liter OMC Cobra stern drive. I'm a fan of Chris Craft, so that's pretty sweet. I believe the engine is at 89 though. Thought not 100% on that. I need to replace the screw, dipstick gasket, vent gasket, and drain plug gasket. It's been super difficult trying to find the correct part, as I see O-rings, flat gasket, and also what appears to be a hard plastic material gasket. Any advice on how to find the correct gasket? So what I would do on that engine, there should be a freeze plug. I'm not 100%, like, I don't know, if it's a 1989 OMC, I'm not as familiar with a 1989 OMC inboard, but I want to say that there are freeze plugs with serial numbers stamped onto them. Otherwise, on the block, I want to say that there is a stamp, because most likely the serial number from the flame arrestor is going to be gone. You're not going to have nothing there, but hopefully you can find a serial number. And if you can find a serial number, you can get an actual age of the engine, and then you'll be able to go on to, Parts View or boats.net, or I'm not sure about an OMC supplier. Generally, there's going to be an aftermarket, like Sierra is going to carry a product like that, those kinds of gaskets and stuff like that is older. But I would try and find the serial number so you can figure out exactly what engine you've got. And then once you figure out exactly what engine you've got, you'll be able to better get to a microfiche or diagram of the part breakout to be able to find the actual parts. Once you get a part number, then you can go and get like a Sierra or an aftermarket part to change those. Otherwise, you're going to have to make gaskets. Depending on what it is, like O-rings, you should be able to get a universal O-ring kit and get an O-ring. That's not a big problem. Making a gasket, depending on what type of gasket is, you can make a gasket. But other than that, yeah, try and find that serial number. I don't know if OMC's had freeze plugs with the serial number stamped in them in 89. I just don't know. That's what I would try and figure out, if you can find a serial number to do that. Only the Best says, which would you recommend is the better method to winterize your boat for up to 6 months? Dry, meaning draining the carburetors and fuel system, or have the engine left wet with ethanol-free fuel and stabilizer mixed in the fuel. Being left wet keeps things from corroding as long as not much water accumulates. I've heard dry carburetors and fuel systems can still condensate and corrode. Also, for your boat's internal gas tank, is it better to get rid of as much fuel as possible before winterizing and add stabilizer, or to keep the tank close to full with stabilizer? Therefore, there's less air inside the tank to condensate. That's like the biggest debate ever of, fuel tank full, fuel tank empty, carbs full, carbs empty. For winterizing, freezing is obviously a problem when you're talking about winterizing. So any chance of freezing, that's why everybody wants it dry, because condensation and the accumulation of water, and then the freezing being a problem. Ethanol, for sure. If you got ethanol in there, you got to get rid of that. You can't let ethanol sit for 6, 7, 8, 9 months at a time. Like, that's going to be massive problems. Ethanol free with stabilizer, I would say, the full tank's going to be better, because like you said, less air, less condensation. I think that would probably be the best bet, is the full tank with the stabilizer. And then also, because you don't have to worry, you're not getting heat. So full tanks, one concern is expansion. As fuel heats up, you create gases, which creates expansion, which creates problems, but all the tanks are vented, so it's not really a problem. Whereas, when you're talking about cold weather and winterizing, I don't think you have a problem at all. I would go the full tank with the stabilizer. As far as the carburetors and the fuel system, we've always done it dry. I would run the stabilizer with the fuel through the fuel system, and then drain the VST and drain the carburetors. So, I'm kind of on that. I'm kind of on the dry side of things. But if you're running ethanol free with a stabilizer in there, leaving it wet, same thing. I don't think you're gonna have any problems, because the fuel stabilizers usually have some sort of like oil type. There is a lubrication aspect built into a fuel stabilizer. So if you have ethanol free fuel and the boat's only going to sit for, say, 6, 7 months, and you have that fuel stabilizer in there, that fuel stabilizer with the lubricating properties that are in it, yeah, if you leave it wet, it's not going to be a problem. It's going to keep it from corroding. So, but at the same time, based on those lubricating properties, when you drain everything, that oiling aspect should stay behind on like your fuel pumps, on your floats, on the bowls, all that stuff. It should have, some, it's kind of hard to say 100% whether it leaves a lubricating aspect back when you drain it out or not. But I mean, dry is fine and wet's going to be fine if you're doing ethanol free with the fuel stabilizer. Personal opinion, really, I guess is what you'd say. Yamaha Evo says that I'm thinking to do the same for Evinrude 175. It has problem with cooling of one of the banks. Need to clean the exhaust cooling and maybe lift it and remove salt and barnacles underneath it. How did your power head look underneath after all these years? So talking about, using rid lime or something like that to clean out the cooling passages. As far as the power head on your Evinrude 175, what that power head looks like, no idea. That the 2004 92-stroke Yamaha powerhead was fine, no trouble. I would be more concerned about certain model years like a 3304 to 06 Yamaha or a Mercaha or a Yamamerc, like those, that engine with the midsection problems. I'd be looking at the powerhead corrosion issues on an Evinrude 175, probably a 90s model is what you're working with here. Depending on where you ran it, is going to depend on what the power head's going to look like. But I don't know. If you pull the power head and you can pull it and inspect it. Otherwise, you don't really need to do that. If you're dealing with one of the banks getting hot, I would just run the rid lime through there. And, if you ran the rid lime, see what it does. Like, that rid lime is going to clean out everything. And if you don't have to take one of the banks off, then, all right. But if you have a corrosion issue, I guess, is what your real concern is. With the 175, you really have a concern with the corrosion issue because the rid lime is going to clean everything out. All those barnacles, all the calcium buildup, all that kind of like stuff, rid lime is going to clean all that out. So if you just hook it up and run the rid lime for 4 or 6 hours, it's going to clean that engine out and it's going to probably eliminate your cooling issue. But if you have a concern of corrosion, meaning that like, in one of your cooling passages, you've got a corrosion issue that's eating through like into one of the cylinders or, out the block or something, then whenever you use that rid lime, it's going to clean all that out. Like all that corrosion, all that calcium, all that that corrosion that's eating through the metal, it's going to clean all that out. It's going to expose any hole that you've got. So if corrosion is a major concern, then you might want to pull one of the plates or even pull the power head, whatever's going to be easiest, and take a look up in there and see, what things look like. But if it's just a cooling issue and you're not worried about the corrosion, then run that rid lime. It's going to clean everything out and it's going to probably eliminate your cooling problem.